5 minutes ago, just before I walked into this video studio, I was on the phone with one of our apostolic leaders in a restricted nation. We like to call those creative access nations. And we were talking about leadership development strategies. And early this morning, while I was praying for the leader I was going to talk to on the other side of the world, I felt like I read something in Scripture that was applicable to him, and I thought, actually, maybe it's for all leaders. And what we talked about was in 2 Kings chapter 5. It's a familiar story to everyone about Naaman. And it's interesting how Naaman is described in verse 1. It says, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria. Okay, commander of the king's army. That is a pretty high position. Maybe that's the second in charge. And when you're in charge of the army of the king, you're a pretty powerful guy. And then it says he was a great man, and that just means he was a powerful man with his master and in high favor. All right, so he's a commander, he's a great man, he has high favor with the king because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. Now that's a theological conundrum right there, but we won't address that on this one, how God gave the Syrian victory. But it says he was a mighty man of valor. And so these descriptions of Naaman you see, and the way he's being described, you see this powerful leader. But watch this. The last part of it says, but he was a leper. He's rich, he's powerful, probably famous. He can pull all the strings he wants to, but he had leprosy. There are people we encounter all the time, and it seems like they have everything going. But what more could they want? But there are issues besides that have no solution. But he had leprosy, and watch the solution, verse 2. Now the Syrians, on the other hand, the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl. Think about this, a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. All right, get this. There had been a raid on Israel, and they carried off a little girl, a powerful leader and a little girl, a powerful leader with an unsolvable problem, leprosy, and then into the story comes the lowest of the low. Probably her parents were killed in a battle, and when you talk about a little girl who's taken after a battle, taken captive, a slave, a servant, and she's assigned to work for this powerful man's wife. And you think about the opposites, the contrast of this powerful military leader who's in favor with the king and this little girl who's been enslaved and in the lowest position that you could imagine. What a contrast. But watch what happens. This little girl who works for, not works for because she's not paid, but in the service of Naaman's wife, she goes to Naaman's wife. Now this is an ethnicity that's looked down upon by these Syrians. This is a female who obviously is looked down upon in that culture. This is someone who's young, and so that's looked down upon. There's 3 strikes against this little girl: a female, an ethnicity that's despised, and the youth. But watch what happens. She goes to the wife of Naaman, and she talks about this prophet in the land of Israel. His name is Elisha. And here's what's amazing about this. The king said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And basically, they go and try to approach this prophet Elisha to get healing. What's amazing about this story is that Naaman actually listened to this young girl of a despised ethnicity. He listened. So many leaders at Naaman's level would never listen to someone outside of the leadership circle. So many times leaders, the higher they go in leadership and the more authority and the more favor and the more power, and as they climb the ranks of leadership, they stop listening to voices that might just be the voice of the Lord to them. They stop listening to voices that might actually have the solution to their unsolvable problem. I wonder how many times I have missed the wisdom of God because I didn't listen to those who were not in positions of leadership. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that when we have an unsolvable problem, we go seek out a little girl and do what they say, but there are times when leaders should be listening to wisdom from God and words from God in unsuspected places. So what happens? He goes. And Elisha's response is interesting. Now you got to remember, this girl had been taken captive. These people, the people in Israel, these Syrians, they were not best friends. They didn't like each other, and we see that in Elisha's response. He wouldn't even see the guy. He just says, just go wash 7 times in the Jordan River and you'll be clean. That was the word of the Lord. And of course, Naaman's offended by this. How dare this little prophet from these people we don't like not show some respect? But then what happens is this, verse 13. So Naaman's rejecting the word from the prophet. It's interesting, he listened to this little girl, but he didn't listen to the prophet. And it says, verse 13, but his servants came near and said, and then they tell him, look, just give it a shot. So once again, Naaman listens to a servant. Naaman got his miracle. Naaman got his solution. Naaman is a powerful leader who got his problem solved because twice he was willing to listen to servants. Twice he had an open ear to hearing wisdom from unsuspected places. So what does this mean to us in the modern world as leaders? We see this powerful male leader listening to a female voice of another ethnicity and a voice that's way too young to listen to. Maybe that's what it means to us too. Maybe God will speak to us through a generation that we're not used to listening to. Maybe through a culture or an ethnicity we're not used to listening to. Maybe we're surrounded by male or female voices, and whichever one we're surrounded by, we hear from a different type of voice coming to us. But the bottom line is, leaders, let's listen. Great leaders are great listeners.